He slammed her with a contempt fine, right there in front of everyone. But what Jasmine Crockett said next? Well, that completely flipped the entire courtroom on its head and left the judge utterly speechless. The courtroom air was warmer than usual that day, not hot, you see, but warm enough to make people shift uncomfortably in their seats, tug at their collars. Something about the atmosphere made you want to clear your throat, even if you didn't have anything to say. Jasmine Crockett stood at the defense table, one hand resting lightly on a stack of folders, the other at her side. She was calm, sharp, impeccably composed, not a wrinkle on her gray slacks, not a bead of sweat on her brow. Her eyes, though, never left Judge Randall Forrester's. The moment he raised his voice, the room tensed. "Ms. Crockett," he said, his tone rigid, "this court does not entertain political speeches disguised as legal arguments. You've been warned once. If you continue down this path, I will find you in contempt." She didn't flinch. "Your Honor," she replied, "with all due respect, this isn't politics, it's precedent. And I'm asking this court to recognize the difference." Forrester leaned back in his chair, his lips pressed tight. He was a man known for two things, his short patience and his exceptionally long memory. He eyed her like someone who'd just been told their favorite rule was being bent. "You've been practicing law long enough to know better," he said. $500 contempt of court. The fine hit the room like a slap, a few gasps, some murmurs, but Jasmine didn't move. The bailiff scribbled on a notepad, the court clerk paused, glanced up. A young law student in the back whispered to his friend, "Did she just get fined for citing case law?" Your like and comment tell the algorithm these stories deserve to be heard. Thanks for your support. Jasmine cleared her throat calmly. Then I respectfully request the court's rationale for the fine, she continued, so it may be reviewed as part of the appellate record. Forrester blinked. He wasn't used to being questioned, at least not like this, from the bench. He could usually smell fear, but Jasmine wasn't afraid. Her tone was measured, her eyes focused, her voice steady. "Excuse me," he said, more a challenge than a question. "You find me in contempt? You're asking for the court's reasoning so it can be entered into the record should it be necessary for review?" He shifted in his chair, you could almost hear the tension hum in the ensuing silence. A few feet away, the prosecutor, Leland Briggs, a by-the-book type, flipped through his own notes with theatrical slowness, as if to say, "Not my problem." He didn't look up. "You're bordering on disrespect," the judge warned. "And you're bordering on suppressing a valid defense," Jasmine shot back, still calm, still measured. "I'm not raising my voice, I'm not making speeches, I'm quoting federal case law and asking the court to hear the facts. If that's contempt, then we've all lost something bigger than $500. Someone exhaled loudly in the gallery, a nervous laugh, then silence again. Judge Forrester stared at her for a long moment, his mouth moved like he was about to speak, then stopped. "Move on," he said finally, "before I make it $1,000. But that didn't stop the shift in the room, because something had happened. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't backed down, and somehow, without raising her voice, she'd made everyone sit up. The judge looked irritated, but also slightly unsure, that rare moment when someone in authority feels a crack forming under their feet and isn't quite sure if it's coming from their own misstep or the person standing in front of them. But before he could regain control of the room, Jasmine turned the page, and what came next was going to rattle more than just the courtroom. 2 days earlier, Jasmine sat in a modest corner office on the second floor of a law firm in downtown Dallas. Not one of those glass towers with fancy views and espresso machines, mind you, just a beige building with creaky floors and file cabinets that still used keys. She was on the phone, pacing slowly in flats that had seen more courtroom floors than fashion runways. "Who's the arresting officer?" she asked, her pen tapping against her notepad. "Officer Trent Walsh," came the voice on the other end. "Pulled 6 protesters out of a sedan outside the Northern Star Oil building. Charged them with unlawful assembly and trespassing." "Were they violent?" "Nope. One of them was a high school teacher, the rest were in their 20s. They were reading statements out loud, sitting on the steps. Jasmine stopped pacing. Reading statements? Yeah, the voice continued, the whole thing's on video. A guy live-streamed it on Facebook. She ran her hand down her face. She'd seen this pattern before: corporate building, private security gets nervous, calls the police, charges get thrown on the books to scare people into staying quiet. But this one felt sloppy. "I'll take it," she said. "You sure?" "No one else touched it. They're calling it a waste of court time." They've said that before. By the end of that day, she had 6 case files spread out across her desk, each protester charged the same way, same arrest report copy-pasted with different names, no statements from the actual building staff, just a rushed affidavit and a few grainy screenshots. But one detail stuck out: Officer Walsh claimed he gave 3 loud verbal warnings before making arrests. On the video, though, he barely got through the first warning before yanking someone to their feet. That someone was Marissa Elkins, a local art teacher who wore cat-eye glasses and carried a sketch pad in her purse. On video, she doesn't even look up before Walsh's hand grabs her wrist. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, the video paused on her screen. She knew this case wouldn't make headlines, but it mattered, not just because people were arrested for sitting and speaking, but because the system was counting on no one paying attention. That's why she didn't hesitate to step into the courtroom this morning. She'd done her research, pulled city ordinances, dug up 2 federal cases that matched the situation almost to the letter. But what she hadn't counted on was Judge Forrester. He wasn't just strict, he was dismissive, the kind who believed protests were loud nonsense and thought civil rights arguments belonged in dusty textbooks, not active courtrooms. Before proceedings began, he barely looked at her, barely acknowledged her clients when she introduced herself. He muttered, "We'll keep this quick." Quick meant quiet, quick meant don't make a scene. Jasmine never made scenes, she made arguments. At the defense table that morning, her clients sat beside her: Marissa, 2 college students, a postal worker, and a community gardener named Daryl with a heart problem who had trouble standing for too long. Jasmine glanced down the row. None of them looked dangerous. They looked tired, anxious, like people who'd been told that speaking up could cost them. And maybe it could, but not if she had anything to say about it. "Stay calm," she whispered. "I'll speak for us." Marissa squeezed her hand under the table. "You always do," she whispered back. But Jasmine wasn't just there to speak, she was there to dismantle every false charge, and by the time she was done, even the judge would have to listen. By the time court resumed that afternoon, the energy in the room had changed. It wasn't dramatic, just quieter. People leaned forward instead of back. They weren't there for fireworks, they were waiting to see what Jasmine would do next. Judge Forrester entered with the same stiff posture and pursed lips as always, but his eyes briefly flicked toward her, just a flick, quick, but it was there. Jasmine stood before the bench, her notes in one hand, her other resting lightly on the table. Her voice didn't need volume, it had weight. "Your Honor," she began, "we're not here to dispute property boundaries or vandalism. My clients sat on concrete steps, they read statements, there was no force, no damage, they didn't even block access to the building. They were arrested because someone didn't like what they were saying." Forrester cut her off. "Miss Crockett, we are not here to retry the arresting officer's discretion. You are here to argue the merits of the motion to dismiss." "I am, Your Honor," she said, still calm, "and the merits are rooted in the First Amendment, reinforced by Martin v. City of Stroud and, more recently, Holder v. Community Network." His eyes narrowed. That last case, Holder, was obscure, barely cited. Most attorneys didn't even reference it because it came from an appellate ruling in Indiana. But Jasmine had found a key overlap. "Your point?" he asked, his voice low. In Holder, she nodded, the court ruled that protesters arrested outside a private office building could not be charged with trespass when the building operated on publicly accessible grounds. Same setup here. The front steps of Northern Star's headquarters are not gated, they're open to pedestrian traffic and business visitors. The judge sat back, folding his arms. So now we're applying rulings from Indiana, she nodded. Not applying, drawing a parallel. Because when states start to mirroring each other in how they respond to peaceful assembly, it becomes a pattern worth acknowledging. The prosecutor, Leland Briggs, sighed loudly. Your Honor, this is a stretch. These people broke the law, plain and simple. Jasmine turned to face him. Mr. Briggs, did you watch the video footage of the arrests? He shifted in place. The department provided incident reports. So you haven't seen the video? That's not relevant. Respectfully, it is, she countered, because the arrest report says Officer Walsh issued 3 warnings. The video shows him barely giving one before grabbing Miss Elkins by the arm, no crowd control order, no PA system, just his voice in a noisy street. And even that, he didn't wait to finish. Forrester flipped through the paperwork in front of him but stopped midway, his eyes lingered on one document longer than the others. Officer Walsh is not present for testimony today, he said. No, sir, Jasmine answered. The department said he's on leave, stress-related. Briggs cut in. He's a decorated officer, and he made an error. Jasmine interrupted, her voice still even. This isn't about blaming him, it's about correcting the result of that error. For a split second, the room was still again. Forrester exhaled slowly through his nose, his face didn't change, but the delay said more than his expression ever could. He was processing it, he wasn't agreeing, not yet, but he was listening. Briggs tried one more jab. She's turning this into a political sideshow. Jasmine didn't even look at him. This isn't a show, this is my clients' lives. They were threatened with criminal records over a silent protest on open steps. If that's the system working, then we need to ask who it's working for. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic, it was uncomfortable. Forrester glanced back at the fine he'd issued earlier that morning. You could tell he was beginning to realize it wasn't just excessive, it was reactive. But what he didn't know yet was that Jasmine hadn't even played her strongest card, not yet. Jasmine flipped to the final page of her notes, her fingers barely touched the paper, but her voice carried every ounce of weight it needed. There's one more case I'd like to introduce into the record, she said, scanning the courtroom without raising her voice. Asterisk Donovan v. Metro P.D. Asterisk, 9th Circuit, 2016. Judge Forrester raised an eyebrow. That was dismissed on procedural grounds, he stated. Jasmine nodded. But the language used by the appellate court in their opinion established a standard, one that aligns with what happened here. Briggs scoffed. Now reciting case language from a case that didn't even proceed. It's not the outcome I'm citing, she said, turning toward him calmly, it's the court's interpretation of how officers handle protests on publicly accessible private property. The court warned against vague orders and reactive policing, which, Your Honor, is exactly what Officer Walsh did. Forrester leaned forward, elbows on the bench, suddenly more alert. You're telling me a single paragraph in a dismissed case should override current Texas law? No, she said, I'm telling you that the law isn't just about punishment, it's about protection. And when we let weak cases slide by with a rubber stamp, we normalize sloppy arrests, then suddenly anyone standing outside with a sign becomes a criminal, even if they're reading from a notebook quietly on a public sidewalk. Briggs folded his arms, he was losing the thread, and he knew it. But Jasmine kept going. She walked slowly toward the front of the room, stopping just short of the jury box. My client, Darrell, has heart problems. He sat down to protest because standing too long could send him back to the ER. He said nothing, made no threats. The officer didn't ask questions, just grabbed him. Same with Marissa, dragged by her wrist like she was resisting. She wasn't, she was reading a quote from Dr. King when he pulled her up. She paused and looked over at the judge. Your Honor, I know this courtroom has seen worse crimes, I know there are bigger cases. But if the justice system can't take these small moments seriously, moments where people are punished simply for being visible, then what's the point of any of this? It was quiet again, but not awkward, more like everyone was recalibrating. Judge Forrester looked down, he thumbed through the arrest reports once more, a crease formed between his eyebrows, his fingers stopped at one name, Marissa Elkins. "Miss Elkins," he said. She stood, nervous, her voice small. "Yes, sir." "You're the one who was reading from a book when you were arrested?" "Yes, sir, from a collection of speeches." "I didn't move when he spoke because I didn't hear him clearly, it was loud on the street." Forrester turned back to Jasmine. "You say this is all on video?" "Yes, sir. We've submitted the footage and time-stamped Officer Walsh's commands versus the physical arrests. You'll see," he begins grabbing protesters 4 seconds after his warning, "no loudspeaker, no second chance." Forrester sat back again, his jaw tight, but his voice quieter than before. "And you're requesting dismissal of all 6 charges?" "I am, on grounds of unlawful arrest, suppression of free speech, and misuse of police authority. My clients exercised a constitutional right in a public-facing space and were penalized because it made someone uncomfortable." The judge didn't speak, he stared at the folder in front of him, and for a moment, Jasmine could see it, the flicker, not quite regret, but reconsideration, like he'd just realized the ground he thought was solid had a crack running straight through it. He reached for his gavel but didn't bring it down, instead, he looked straight at her. "I'll take the motion under advisement." She nodded once, respectfully, no smile, no sigh of relief, just stillness. Briggs didn't say a word, neither did the clerk, but the room felt different now, not just because of what had been said, but because no one was looking at Jasmine like she was the problem anymore. But just when things seemed to settle, Judge Forrester opened the file one last time, and what he read next changed everything. Judge Forrester flipped through the folder with mechanical precision, page after page of arrest reports, witness statements, and supporting documents. Then, without warning, he paused, his brow furrowed. It was a small detail buried in the back, an affidavit signed by a building security manager from Northern Star. Jasmine had read it already, twice, she knew what was coming. "This statement," Forrester said slowly, lifting the page with 2 fingers. "This came from the property manager?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jasmine replied. "His name is Gerard Blanche, he signed the affidavit the morning after the arrests." "Did you submit this?" "No, it was submitted by the prosecution." Briggs blinked. Yes, it came with the initial packet from the department." Forrester began reading aloud. "At the time of the protest, the building entrances were not obstructed, and no physical damage was observed. Protesters remained seated on the front steps and did not interfere with foot traffic or business operations. Police were not requested by property management but appeared after a phone call from a private tenant on the 5th floor." He stopped, the courtroom was still, then he read it again, slower. "Police were not requested by property management." Briggs shifted. "Your Honor, that doesn't mean the protest was legal." "No," Forrester said, his voice sharper now, "but it does mean the arresting officer didn't have direction from the building's ownership or management, which raises a question, why did he escalate so quickly?" He looked at Jasmine, and for the first time since the trial began, his gaze didn't hold annoyance, it held curiosity. She didn't press, she let the silence sit. Then he turned to Briggs again. "Did you question Officer Walsh about this?" No, sir. I relied on the arrest reports." "Which contradicts this statement." Briggs's mouth opened, then closed again. Forrester turned to the bailiff. "Pull up the video on the evidence monitor." A few taps later, the footage played, it was shaky, but clear enough, the sound of cars passing, a few voices in the background, then Officer Walsh steps into frame, speaking with what sounds like urgency, but without a megaphone or microphone, barely audible. You could hear Marissa's voice, clear as day, and that's why the voices of the people must not be ignored. Then his hand grabs her, another protester stands in shock, he's pulled up next, no second warning. Forrester leaned back again, his expression unreadable. The room watched him, not the video, and then he looked at Jasmine. You wrote a memo on Holder v. Community Network in law school, she blinked. Yes. How do you know that? He held up the same affidavit, flipped to the back. Gerard Blanche mentioned your name, he said. Said you represented a tenant of his in a discrimination claim 7 years ago, said you dismantled their argument in court without ever raising your voice. The courtroom suddenly felt smaller. Didn't mention that, he said. Why? I didn't think it was relevant. He studied her face for a long moment. You know the law, he said, and you know how to apply it without theater. That's rare. Then he turned to Briggs. I'm dismissing the charges, all 6, based on insufficient grounds for arrest and failure to meet the burden of proof regarding unlawful assembly. Bang! The gavel hit the wood, gasps, a few stunned glances. Darrow put his head in his hands. Marissa let out a quiet laugh that turned into a sob. Jasmine just stood there, eyes locked on the bench, like she wasn't finished. Forrester cleared his throat. As for the earlier fine for contempt, I'm striking it from the record. Silence again. You've made your point, Miss Crockett. She looked him in the eye. I wasn't trying to, he nodded, barely, almost like it hurt. But before the courtroom emptied, one final conversation was waiting outside those double doors, and it wouldn't come from the judge. The wooden doors swung open, and the courtroom emptied slowly, like people weren't quite ready to return to the real world. Jasmine walked out last, her folder tucked under one arm. She didn't speak, not yet. Her clients surrounded her, quietly relieved, overwhelmed, a little stunned. The hallway outside was narrow, the kind of corridor where fluorescent lights buzz faintly overhead and every footstep echoes too long. Darrow leaned against the wall, hand on his chest, not from strain, just catching his breath. You saved us, he whispered. I really thought I was going to walk out of there with a record for sitting down. You didn't break the law, Jasmine said. You made someone uncomfortable. There's a difference. Marissa stepped forward, her voice still catching. Can I ask you something? Of course. How did you stay so calm in there? When he fined you? When he interrupted you? I would have lost it. Jasmine smiled a little, without humor. Because the moment I make it personal, I lose control of the conversation. But it was personal, he insisted. He disrespected you, he undermined you. Jasmine stirred the ice in her glass, still not drinking. Yeah, it was personal. But justice doesn't care how you feel, it only listens when you speak its language. He tried to box me in, so I gave him something he couldn't throw out, a legal wall with no cracks. But he wanted to discredit you, Nico said. You saw it. I see it all the time. That silenced him. She leaned in slightly. You ever seen someone try to lift a weight they weren't trained for? They strain, they panic, they drop it. That's what it feels like when people try to carry the burden of injustice without the right tools. He stared at her. That courtroom wasn't about showing off, she continued. It was about giving the law its proper shape. That judge had a hammer in his hand, and he thought I was the nail. But the thing is, hammers don't work on steel. Nico's eyes widened a little. So you came in prepared, he said. I came in solid, she replied. Because sometimes you don't get second chances, you get one shot to make people see they're wrong. And if you waste it yelling, they'll only remember the noise. He looked down at his notebook. I want to be that good one day. You will, she said, but not if you're trying to be me. Be better than me. Study the law like it's a language you haven't learned yet, learn every corner of it. And when the day comes that someone says you're out of line, you won't need to raise your voice, you'll just raise your evidence. For a moment, the table was quiet. Then he looked up again. Do you ever get tired of it? She finally took a sip of her tea. All the time, she said, but I get more tired of seeing people lose because no one showed up. Across the street, two teenage girls passed by, holding signs from the protest. One sign read, "We have the right to speak," the other, "We're not going away." Nico noticed them too. They don't even know what you just did for them. They don't need to, she said. They just need to know someone fought for the rules to protect them. That's enough. She stood, gathering her things. One day, she said, someone's going to look at you in court the way you looked at me today, and they're going to remember what fairness sounds like. Don't take that lightly. He nodded, silent again, eyes heavy with the weight of what he'd seen. As Jasmine walked away, the sun dipped behind the edge of the buildings, and her shadow followed just behind, quiet, steady, certain. Because sometimes the strongest voices don't need to echo, they just need to last. If you believe in fairness, real fairness, the kind that doesn't shout but holds steady, share this story. Hit like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments, who came out on top in this elite showdown. Later that evening, Jasmine sat outside a small cafe off Swiss Avenue. The late sun painted long shadows across the pavement, and for the first time all day, she looked like she could breathe. Her blazer was folded neatly beside her, a glass of iced tea sat untouched on the table. Across from her sat Nico, a first-year law intern, barely 2 months into the job, still carrying more questions than answers. He had followed her from the courthouse without saying a word, and now his notebook was open, but his pen wasn't moving. "I don't get it," he finally said. "You could have snapped back when he fined you, when he dismissed you. Why didn't you?" She smiled, without humor. "Because the moment I make it personal, I lose control of the conversation." "But it was personal," he insisted. "He disrespected you, he undermined you." Jasmine stirred the ice in her glass, still not drinking. "Yeah, it was personal. But justice doesn't care how you feel, it only listens when you speak its language. He tried to box me in, so I gave him something he couldn't throw out, a legal wall with no cracks. But he wanted to discredit you," Nico said. "You saw it. I see it all the time." That silenced him. She leaned in slightly. "You ever seen someone try to lift a weight they weren't trained for? They strain, they panic, they drop it. That's what it feels like when people try to carry the burden of injustice without the right tools." He stared at her. "That courtroom wasn't about showing off," she continued. "It was about giving the law its proper shape. That judge had a hammer in his hand, and he thought I was the nail. But the thing is, hammers don't work on steel." Nico's eyes widened a little. "So you came in prepared," he said. "I came in solid," she replied. "Because sometimes you don't get second chances, you get one shot to make people see they're wrong. And if you waste it yelling, they'll only remember the noise." He looked down at his notebook. "I want to be that good one day." "You will," she said, "but not if you're trying to be me. Be better than me. Study the law like it's a language you haven't learned yet, learn every corner of it. And when the day comes that someone says you're out of line, you won't need to raise your voice, you'll just raise your evidence." For a moment, the table was quiet. Then he looked up again. "Do you ever get tired of it?" She finally took a sip of her tea. "All the time," she said, "but I get more tired of seeing people lose because no one showed up." Across the street, two teenage girls passed by, holding signs from the protest. One sign read, "We have the right to speak," the other, "We're not going away." Nico noticed them too. They don't even know what you just did for them. They don't need to, she said. They just need to know someone fought for the rules to protect them. That's enough. She stood, gathering her things. One day, she said, someone's going to look at you in court the way you looked at me today, and they're going to remember what fairness sounds like. Don't take that lightly. He nodded, silent again, eyes heavy with the weight of what he'd seen. As Jasmine walked away, the sun dipped behind the edge of the buildings, and her shadow followed just behind, quiet, steady, certain. Because sometimes the strongest voices don't need to echo, they just need to last. Your like and comment tell the algorithm these stories deserve to be heard. Thanks for your support.